Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final live session of our boot camp. Today, we're going to be covering an exciting topic, which is how to best design a network of air quality sensors. Bit of a tricky question that, traditionally there's been somewhat limited guidance out there on, how to even approach designing a network of air sensors. But fortunately, we have my colleague, Dr. Maggie, here today to share some insights from actually, Maggie's just completed a dissertation for her PhD on this topic. So she'll have some great insights to share with us on today's call, and hand it over to you, Maggie.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for the introduction. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Maggie, and I'm excited to present to all of you today. And as Ryan also mentioned, I just completed my doctorate at UCLA in environmental science and engineering. And working at Clarity for the last year has really given me a lot of research insight. And I was fortunate to spend a portion of my dissertation research on sensor network design and kind of the emerging topic and what's out there and what's available and how we can use it. So I'm really excited to present to all of you on how important this topic is. So just to kind of set the framework, air pollution is one of the greatest public health crises of our time. The World Health Organization estimates 7 million premature deaths that can be attributed to air pollution exposure. So the image you see on the slide really shows that air pollution is a health impact crisis from head to toe. So this image shows the health effects of air pollution, although the most well-studied impacts include respiratory illness, asthma, cardiovascular disease, bodily inflammation, and premature mortality. And really the prevalence of all of these health impacts shows how important it is to have effective air monitoring solutions that can help us better understand both exposure and localized air quality impacts. So I know in the previous boot camps, you all discussed kind of the difference between regulatory versus hybrid monitoring networks, but just to kind of bridge in the importance with health, to manage air quality, as in many countries, including the United States, agencies are required to set up regional air monitoring networks, which are used to determine compliance with national ambient air quality standards. These standards are typically designed to protect public health and the environment. So the image on the left shows what we would call a regional air monitoring network or a regulatory air monitoring network. So as you can see, it's pretty big. It requires a lot of land, it requires power. It definitely requires a lot of expertise to maintain and regulate. And it also requires a lot of siting requirements that are set by the US EPA. And so as a result of this, there aren't very many of these monitors around Los Angeles. We can see just from the map that there are quite a few spatial areas that are not covered. And so while previously this might have been a good solution, using a monitor that's in one location to estimate concentrations and exposure may no longer be effective. The image on the right is our Clarity Node S, which monitors PM 2.5 and NO2. And so monitors like Clarity and other low-cost sensors have gained popularity to increase spatial coverage of air monitoring. And they have a variety of uses. So some countries are using it to monitor air for the first time, and some other community organizations are using them to help understand impacts from sources like transportation. And so this interest from some of these organizations has sparked the need for this highly spatialized data. And so the image that you see on the right is also of Los Angeles, but all of these are Clarity Node S's that you see, and they are all deployed at schools within the Los Angeles Unified School District, and they're being used by the district to make decisions about student health. So in addition to this, the US EPA has begun to identify uses of low-cost sensors for various projects and have funded communities, local, regional, and state organizations to use low-cost sensors. The US EPA also uses low-cost sensors for science education, research, and measuring local air quality to better understand sources of air pollution. In 2020, the US EPA's Government Accountability Office prepared a report that explored new opportunities that can better sustain and modernize these regional monitors for the National Ambient Air Quality Monitoring System. And the study actually found that low-cost sensors have the potential to help and meet some of these monitoring information needs, which really, again, the need for highly spatial localized data. So in addition to US EPA, there are other government agencies that are using low-cost sensors. So in California, the California Air Resources Board has funded community air monitoring projects through the Community Air Protection Program, also known as AB 617. This program requires that local air districts work with communities that are disproportionately burdened by air pollution to develop community emission reduction and community air monitoring plans. And many of these community air monitoring plans may include technologies such as low-cost sensors. Also in California, the South Coast Air Quality Management District was previously issued a US EPA STAR grant, which created the Air Quality Sensor Performance Evaluation Center, which studied and characterized the uses for low-cost sensors and evaluated their performance in different settings. Moving down to Texas, low-cost sensors have been used by the city of Texas, Harris County, and other community-based organizations for collecting influences around the city, such as to determine compliance and enforcement, and to deploy mobile monitoring when residents have reported concerns about air pollution. So one big question with the development of this very new and emerging technology is how do you design a low-cost sensor network? Where should they be placed? How many should be purchased? What are the sources to be measured? And what reasoning goes into these questions? And so again, with the emergence of this technology, this is a very understudied topic. There is very limited research on sensor network design, and the variety and different project scopes makes it challenging to create any type of guidance or framework that would serve every project. So knowing that this was a newer topic and seeing that this was a big industry need, I decided to take it on as part of my dissertation research. So I conducted a literature review to learn more about the resources available to design low-cost sensor networks and how those could be synthesized in a easy to use guide that would assist projects in using them. So for this presentation, I will be using the working definition of sensor network design that you see on the slide. So I'm defining this as the process used to determine the optimal placement of individual air quality sensors to measure air pollutant concentrations and answer specific project goals. So just kind of an overview of the research that I did while I was at UCLA. So I conducted a comprehensive literature review as part of my dissertation research. And so what I did was I used scientific databases through UCLA. I worked with a librarian to kind of search through all relevant data sources. And I also did a gray literature search. So I used Google and Google Scholar. And finally, I also surveyed professionals in the low-cost sensor field to better understand what resources are currently available that may not be presented in the literature. So in all of the research that I found, you see all the variables listed on the right were mentioned in some capacity across all sources. So all sources agreed that it is important to identify your project goals, identify your budget, understand what air quality knowledge is available within the group conducting the project, what the air pollution sources are, what the community expertise is, and what the best locations are for sensor placement. And if you would like to see more about my research, my dissertation is actually linked on this slide that I think will be shared later. But this is really just a very high level of the work that I did. So I used the literature that I found to develop what I am calling the sensor network design decision framework that are based on elements that seem to be consistent for all projects. So these three boxes that you see here are the core items that are needed to set up a low-cost sensor network. So in the previous bootcamp presentations, we really talked about the importance of establishing project goals. So I'm just emphasizing here on how important it is to have those project goals so that you can better understand how to move forward when you're designing a sensor network. Now, these arrows here are drawn in both directions and are pointing to and from each of these steps to indicate that this is a very iterative process. So you may decide when you study your project goals that you're interested in an entire city. However, you may decide based on your budget and other factors that you really only have enough funding or you only have enough capacity for maybe a small community. And so thus your study area might change and your project goals might change. And then around these core, I drew this circle, and I'm going to show you the boxes that I drew around it. And the reason that it's a circle and not kind of like a process where you see arrows going ABC is that, again, this is a very iterative process. You may or may not review different variables as you move throughout the process. So starting from the top. So it is really important that you establish early on what the community input or professional expertise is for your project. So understanding what the impact might be on the ground, understanding kind of who's at the table and whose input's going to be valuable when moving forward in your project. So moving clockwise, there are some quantitative methods that were identified in the literature that primarily use a lot of computer modeling, machine learning, simulations, and statistical estimates. A lot of them use what's called a gridded approach, where they essentially put a grid over a spatial area, and they use different variables such as historic air quality data or land use data to essentially weigh what areas would benefit from sensors the most. These are pretty in-depth processes that definitely require a lot of expertise. And again, all of this literature is listed in the literature review if you're interested in reviewing it. Kind of moving on to some other variables, budget is often the most limiting factor when determining what you can or how you can set up your low-cost sensor network, primarily because it's dependent on how many sensors you want to buy and for what pollutants, which will also change the price. So that could definitely be very limiting. Another variable to consider is location feasibility. So understanding the characteristics about the location where the low-cost sensor will ultimately need to be placed. So for example, if the low-cost sensor needs power and connectivity, are those available in the location that you want to deploy it? And you also have to consider if the project has permission to place the low-cost sensors where they want to. So if they want to place it on a city street light or some type of location that's owned by another entity, they're going to have to get permission to do that. Otherwise, they'll have to solicit volunteers, maybe from schools or from residents who are interested in hosting the sensor. I think it's also important to note for location feasibility, a lot of air quality experts recommend doing a co-location or locating the low-cost sensor next to the reference monitor to ensure that the data being collected is accurate. So that's another question to ask is, do you have access to that low-cost sensor? Are you in communication with the local air quality authority to get that information? Another variable to consider is depending on the project goals and the sources of interest, the pollutants that you want to measure may vary. So, and depending on the pollutants, the cost of the low-cost sensors will change. So again, all of these variables that you see can be visited in any order depending on the project needs and goals. And so you may decide that pollutants of interest need to be visited first, or budget or location feasibility. And again, this is a very iterative process, so you may revisit these at any time. So I just wanted to highlight one example of a quantitative decision support tool that I was able to research. So this is a study that was funded by US EPA, where researchers used a quantitative model called a multi-resolution dynamic mode decomposition model to identify placement of additional PM 2.5 sensors. So researchers used historic PM 2.5 data obtained between 2000 to 2016, and they studied the variation of those PM concentrations over time to identify areas that would be high priority. And that was defined by areas that had high variation in PM 2.5. And the results of this study suggest that there are major gaps in the current US EPA monitoring network in certain areas of the United States, particularly the West Coast. And so the image on the left shows two maps. The top map shows US EPA monitoring locations in 2016, and the bottom map shows basically more ideal areas where additional monitoring would benefit the area. So what I would like to do now is present an actual case study that we worked on here at Clarity with a customer. And so we worked with a community-based organization based in Southern California who was interested in setting up a low-cost sensor network. And so they were really concerned about a few sources. So their primary concerns were warehouse, particularly truck traffic to the warehouses, rail, and industrial facilities. And they wanted to set up a low-cost sensor network to show their local officials to advocate for better land use decisions and increase community education and health. So again, kind of using the framework more iteratively, we're going to do the variables in a different order. And so to get started with this project, the first step that we did was to identify the pollutants of interest. And so because the community is interested in transportation primarily and some industrial facilities, we came to the conclusion that PM 2.5 and black carbon would be the best, the most optimal pollutants for them to measure. And so because black carbon is typically more expensive than monitoring PM 2.5, we then had to understand their budget. And so they were working with a $300,000 US EPA grant over 3 years, but had explicitly told us that only half of that money could be used for monitoring. Then we decided to better understand what connections the organization had for location feasibility. So had they talked to the local air pollution authority? Did they have volunteers that were willing to host the monitors? Did they have any connections with the city or county where they could place them? And so the organization was very well connected with the schools, but didn't have any connections with the city or county. But they did have a really strong volunteer base that would be willing to host the sensors. And so that was what drove them to place them in certain locations. And finally, because this is a community-based organization, they came to the conclusion that they would rely exclusively on community input and expertise because they themselves did not have the capacity or expertise to explore any of the quantitative decision support tools available. And so taking all of these variables into consideration, the organization decided that their project goals were to increase air quality transparency, increase data use to support land use decisions, and educate the community on air quality. The organization also came to the conclusion that their city was small enough that they felt like they could place a representative network over that area. And finally, based on primarily budget and location feasibility, the organization ultimately decided on 14 total monitors. So they decided on 12 PM 2.5 monitors and 2 black carbon monitors. And the locations of those monitors were in places that represented a combination of community health concerns and locations with suspected air pollution sources in proximity to the volunteer residents. So kind of transitioning over to an actual example that we have here at Clarity of using a hybrid network, so a combination of low-cost sensors and reference monitors, is our Breathe London network. So this network launched in January of 2021, and this network integrates measurements from hundreds of air sensors, particularly Clarity nodes, with reference grade measurements provided by London's regulatory air pollution monitoring network. And the Breathe London network offers many ways to engage citizens in the issue of air quality and catalyze moves towards a zero pollution future. And this project has really demonstrated that there is a high demand for localized air monitoring, even in developed cities like London. So Breathe London really aims to cover a large geographic and demographic spread, aiming to ultimately reach their most disadvantaged communities. They decided to focus their network on where people spend their time. And in order to capture this, the Breathe London project relied on community involvement with local authorities and community groups. And locations identified included public spaces, volunteer hosts, businesses, and local governments that were willing to engage and host the sensor. And the goal of Breathe London was really to work to enhance their regulatory monitoring network, but use low-cost sensors to synergize their regulatory air monitoring network and cover those areas that weren't previously covered. And so these two maps that you see represent the difference in air quality monitoring coverage before and after the launch of the Breathe London network. So the map on the left shows only the regulatory monitoring networks around the London metro area, whereas the map on the right shows the drastic increase in air quality monitoring coverage that would not have been feasible or timely without low-cost sensor technology. So you may all be familiar with our Clarity Node S, which measures pollutants like PM 2.5 and NO2, which are highly prevalent pollutants and pollutants of great public health concern. But there may be other pollutants that are known to cause adverse health impacts. So knowing this information, Clarity decided to talk to many of our community partners and other organizations to identify some common pollutants that projects would also be interested in monitoring, keeping their air quality questions in mind. And so as a result, Clarity has added other modules to our product lineup to answer those specific questions. So when thinking about sources of pollution, ensuring that you have the proper monitoring equipment for those pollutants, along with measuring characteristics of the environment, is really helpful for better understanding and answering very specific project questions about air quality patterns and identifying areas that may need more attention. So starting from the left, our wind module, or as I like to call it, our meteorology module, was added to help projects understand how air pollution might be transporting through their area. Our ozone module was added to help confirm ozone attainment with ozone standards. And our black carbon module was added to help understand the composition of particles from different air pollution sources. And I'll go into a few more detail on the following slides. So our wind module, or our meteorology module, measures temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, and can assist projects in better understanding how these characteristics can impact air quality transport and ultimately impacts on an area. This data can be used to better understand where the prevalent air quality may be coming from, citing specific sources. So this image shows pollution roses available on the Clarity dashboard, which can provide insights to where the prevailing winds are coming from and couple this with air quality data and information to, again, better understand where to focus future efforts. As mentioned previously, our ozone module, which is FEM capable, meaning that it has the precision of a federally equivalent monitor or method, provides highly precise instrumentation in what we call a non-FEM configuration. So it's much smaller and can be deployed more easily. And it can really help regions understand better ozone patterns and determine if all areas within a region are in attainment. So in my other dissertation research, what I did see is that there are areas where there could be ozone variability. So although ozone is a regional pollutant, there might be localized changes that could be captured with more highly spatial monitoring. And finally, with the prevalence of increased transportation and concerns around warehouses and the goods movement, our black carbon module can be really helpful with characterizing impacts from many sources, such as transportation, such as wildfire, or such as industry. Black carbon is a known carcinogen in California and is very localized. And this module is helpful and is designed to provide some composition characteristics and provide highly localized information about sources and impacts to local communities. And so kind of moving away from after you've set up the sensor network, what you're actually going to do with the data. So once you've collected the data, it's important to think about how it will be visualized and used. So one tool that Clarity provides is our dashboard, which is private to the user. The Clarity dashboard is helpful to quickly understand air quality at your monitoring locations, explore data, insights, and trends, and manage your data network. So for example, you can load and plot data in an easy way. You can compare data from Clarity monitors and reference sites. You can monitor the accuracy at your co-location sites, and you can understand changes over space and time for pollutant distribution. And then the map on the right shows our Clarity open map. So if you'd like to publicize your data, you can opt into posting your data on the Clarity open map, which allows users to see insights and compare concentrations in different areas. And this is completely available to the public. Now, if you're interested in pulling your air quality data onto your own platform, we also have an API which provides a secure interface for customers to acquire their Clarity data and build out the data in their own system and create their own tools. So for example, the image on the right-hand side is of Ramble Share, which is a hyper-localized air quality map developed by Ramble. And Clarity data is ingested into this map and fed into it and includes other data such as traffic, regional air monitoring data, and weather data. So some conclusions to take away from this is increasing spatial coverage of air quality monitoring is very critical for understanding public health and the environment. And low-cost sensor network design is still very much an emerging topic, but conversations can really be began with a framework like this. And finally, solutions moving forward include hybrid government and low-cost sensor networks, which can be used to enhance local understanding and really understand where to devote resources. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan for some final reminders.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much, Maggie, for a great session. And, certainly fortunate to have somebody as knowledgeable on this topic as you on our team. And yeah, thank you for your contributions to the field as well. Yeah. So, and congrats again. I know the dissertation was recently, so congratulations on that. Yeah. So just a reminder to everyone to submit any questions for Dr. Maggie through the Q&A box. We've already got a couple of questions queued up, but we've got plenty of time for the Q&A session today. So please do feel free to send any questions our way. And yeah, before we jump into Q&A, just a couple of reminders. So there is a homework assignment, another brief 10-15 minute worksheet that just will help you think through this process, of the framework that Maggie's just shared with us all. And think about things like how many sensors will I need for this area that I'm looking to cover? How will I secure the budget for those sensors? What air pollutants do I need to measure to answer, my project goals or, research questions that I have for this project? So yeah, I would really encourage everyone to, complete this session's homework assignment. And if you do want to receive a certificate of completion for the boot camp, we'll be accepting submissions for all 3 homework assignments through next Wednesday, through the 28th of June. So one more week to get all of your homework in and get that certificate of completion for the Air Quality Sensor Bootcamp. Secondly, just while the bootcamp will be wrapping up at the end of June, or at least this session, we'll be running future boot camps. We're considering doing a 201, talking a bit more about these additional pollutants that Maggie referenced today. So little more of a deep dive on things like ozone measurement, black carbon measurement. So stay tuned for our 201, if this was our Air Sensors 101 boot camp, sort of taking things to the next level. And we will be keeping the Slack channel, the Clarity Community Slack channel, open following the boot camp. So would encourage everyone to continue to connect with other folks in the industry. If you do have any questions for Clarity, you can always feel free to reach out to us, via Slack or via the hello@clarity email address. And lastly, yeah, just would encourage you all to get in touch with our team if you're interested in collaborating on an air monitoring program or project, or if you're just interested in learning more about the work that Clarity does. Can certainly put you in touch with the appropriate folks on our team. So yeah, with all of that said, I think we'll jump over to the Q&A. So maybe go to the next slide, Maggie. Thank you. And yeah, we've got a few queued up here already. So yeah, we can start with maybe this one from Karen. So regarding the number of non-regulatory sensors, is there guidance for the need for redundancy to account for data outliers and or sensor degradation?
I think this question can probably be answered by, I can probably very limitedly answer this because I think this is a topic that comes up a lot. So the lifespan of low-cost sensors is a lot, less than traditional monitoring and does need to account for that. I think the best way to answer this is, I actually don't think there is consistent guidance. I think EPA has some guidance, but I think we need more to account for data outliers and sensor degradation. I know as part of the Clarity model, if your sensor begins to kind of deviate from the norm, then we would replace it with a new sensor. The lifespan of those can vary. And so I think there needs to be more consistent guidance, and it is very much ad hoc right now.
Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. I think, we're all learning as an industry more about this. And I know our partners on the Breathe London project are, using, that large scale project as sort of a petri dish for, learning more about sensor lifetime. But yeah, that is why we offer, a warranty and free hardware replacements as part of our sensing as a service model. Just, we do recognize that while there's, a lot of benefit to these lower cost devices, partially by virtue of being lower cost, they do, degrade over time. So that's something that we've accounted for, with the warranty approach. Good. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that, Maggie. So we've got a question from Eric here, I think with respect to your literature review. So were there any studies that specifically looked at areas of concern for environmental justice to weigh locations for sensor networks in your experience?
Yep, that's a good question. So there was one study that, although it wasn't conducted by like using any quantitative methods, there was a study that looked at the sensor network design for the Ivan network, or the Imperial Valley monitoring network, which is based in Imperial Valley, California. And so they did go through, essentially what they did was they looked at historic air quality data in addition to, so they co-located a low-cost sensor with the reference monitor, and then they did a deployment for a year, and they found that there was high variability from the reference monitor to the low-cost sensor. That was probably the only and the strongest environmental justice related low-cost sensor network design topic that I found. But there weren't very many that were specifically focused on environmental justice, but rather, focusing on the monitoring either where the people are living or where the sources are, which unfortunately in these communities go hand in hand.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Maggie, for a great answer on that. So we have a question from Luciano. Says, I think it's relevant to have a network of sensors close to schools or places where children circulate. What experience or success stories do you have in this regard, and how should one proceed to have such a network? So the tie-in with schools, which I know is something we see across a lot of our projects.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I think you have to look at the entities individually. So like looking at the school district, for example, LAUSD, which is one of the largest school districts in the United States, is using the low cost and is using the Clarity solution to make decisions about students and whether they should be outside, or during wildfires, if they should even be in school at all. And so I think in that regard, working with the school district is going to be important. Now, if you're looking at other entities like libraries or parks or, community centers, then the transition would probably have to be towards the city or the county or whatever entity is in charge of those locations. And in some areas, I know that those are one and the same. But in California, at least with Los Angeles Unified School District, that's an entity that would have to be engaged. And then if you wanted to expand that, you'd likely have to engage with the city of Los Angeles, county of Los Angeles, and other surrounding cities. So I think the first step would be to find those partners and see and kind of work together with them. One nice thing about the Clarity solution, again, is that our dashboard allows you to share across organizations. So if you have a city and a school district who are working on this effort together, they can see all of their data in one place, despite the fact that it would require probably engagement with both of those entities just to get it started.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Maggie and Luciano. Of course, if you want to talk about that process of engaging with schools, something we're more than happy to set up some time to discuss with you. But yeah, just, across, many of our largest projects, obviously LAUSD is directly with the school district, but even in London with Breathe London, and in Perth, in Australia with the RAC network that we discussed last week, schools end up being a popular siting location. They just make sense for a lot of reasons. We want to protect our kids as a sensitive population. They tend to have good, I guess, kind of open, unobstructed spaces that, where they can host a sensor. And of course, there's also the potential for, educational tie-ins with the data, as Maggie, referenced. We've made that available through our dashboard for some of our school partners, which has been great for getting some of this data into the classroom, and helping to train the next generation of environmental scientists like Dr. Maggie. Great. Well, okay, so let's move to another one. So a question from Rashmi says, this was a great talk, and thanks. Glad you enjoyed it. I agreed on that. Could we hear a little more about the construction of pollutant rows diagrams, what goes into it, and how long does it take?
That's a good question. I could probably give you like a high level of what it looks like and how long it takes. So essentially the pollution rows combines the air pollution concentration with the prevalent wind direction to determine where it's coming from. So if you see like a prevalent pollution rows from the northwest, do you also see pollution that's coming? Like, do you also see that that's what's impacting the concentration from that location? As far as how long it takes, I think it would be probably, and I don't want to misspeak, but I know that the metrics that we have are like 1 hour or 24 hour. And so really it would just be strengthened the more data that you have, but I would love to get more information and get you a more specific answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think depends on the tools you have available, of course, as well, right?
Yep.
So, in our dashboard, for example, if you have wind modules deployed, those wind roses are, an automatic feature. They, show up to, they, perform the calculations and, generate the wind roses. But yeah, of course, there are, different tools and different approaches. So appreciate the nuance there, Maggie. Let's see. So got a question, I guess, getting a little more into the specifics of siting locations. So it's from an anonymous attendee, but the question is, I think that sensors are placed at a representative location with well-mixed air and at a particular height. So how do you approach determining these? And, for example, in one picture in the PowerPoint, there was a sensor shown to be fixed on a building wall. In other cases, sometimes they're attached to a pole or, other locations. So, I guess getting into kind of the details of like actually choosing the right location to deploy the sensor for airflow and whatnot. Is that something that you want to weigh in on, Maggie?
Yeah, I could probably give, again, a high level, but I know that we have for our customers in our knowledge base that there are like siting requirements and guidelines that we have. The ideal place that you would want to put it is just above the breathing height to make sure that you can capture, as you mentioned, like the proper pollutant mix. And if you're looking at exposure, making sure that you're capturing what people are actually breathing. The goal is to place it somewhere in an unobstructed area. However, with low cost sensors, we know that people are working with different landscapes all the time. And so being aware of like the most optimal placement is going to give you the most optimal results is probably important. I've seen it for certain communities where it was placed like under a bay, a school bus bay, which was giving them really high readings. And so we had to then recommend that they, move it to a more open area. Also when you're working with low cost sensors, it's important that you don't have it too low because you don't want it to get stolen. And so, really working within all of these kind of variables is important, but I know that we have more specific information available. So I'll like leave it at that as kind of that high level.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Maggie. And yeah, there are some great resources on our knowledge base with respect to, sensor deployment, tips and tricks. And we do also have a white paper with some guidance on that. And yeah, we can make sure to add links to both of our white papers to the materials hub that we have for Air Sensor Bootcamp. And yeah, I guess so. Kind of on that note, we do have a question from another anonymous person. What does the calibration process for Clarity sensors look like? And I will mention, so not sure if everyone was able to attend all 3 of our bootcamp sessions, but we did dive into that in a good degree of detail on the first session with Jack, our air quality data scientist. Talking a bit about, how Clarity approaches co-locating and calibrating sensors and, some of the results from our calibration approach. But yeah, I guess, I don't know, Maggie, if there's anything else you would want to weigh in on that side of things, the calibration process and how it relates to network design.
Yeah, I would probably defer to whatever Jack talked about, but again, kind of giving the high level key points. Definitely it does also depend on the pollutant. So there's different calibration for NO2 that there would be from PM 2.5. In terms of, thinking about network design and thinking about how companies calibrate, I think it's important to consider that there are different, even just within the United States and within the world, there are different meteorological conditions that can impact calibration, that can impact measurements. You have seasonal variations and things like that. And so I think it's important to understand that those variables will play a role in the calibration. And Jack probably talked about that, but just some factors to keep in mind. And, really the longer you can leave the monitor co-located, the more data that can be collected, that usually can help strengthen the calibration. But those would probably be kind of like the big takeaways, I would say.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, thanks, Maggie. And we'll, follow up this session with, a link, to the resources or materials hub where we do have the recording of that first session, that was a bit more focused on calibration. And as well as, of course, links to all the homework assignments, these white papers. So would really encourage everyone to, take a look at the materials hub and check out the resources that we have there. I think it's, a lot of great information on many of these topics. So Maggie, we have a question from Eric that I think we can probably follow up with you, Eric, after the call on this, but it's interesting to me because I think it could be applicable to other states or regions as well. So the question is Clarity interested in any state partnerships for widely distributed sensing? Sounds like Minnesota is looking into partnerships for statewide monitoring. Is that something that you want to weigh in on, Maggie?
Yeah, we would definitely be interested. I have a former colleague who used to work for the Minnesota EPA. So yeah, I would love to get involved and see how Clarity can fit in.
Great. Yeah. So Eric, we'll make sure to follow up with you after that. But we do have a lot of projects that cover not just community scale or city scale, but even some regional projects in the works. And we'll follow up with you, and we can share some more information on our experience with programs like that. But yeah, exciting to hear that Minnesota is looking into the potential of sensor technology. I do think it's really coming into its own as a supplement to regulatory equipment. And yeah, hope their quality is not too poor out there these days, Eric, with the fires. Okay, so looking through the questions we have here. So another one from an anonymous attendee, but I do think it's an interesting topic. So Are you aware of any guidelines regarding how air quality data should be displayed to residents, and what data should be included in a dashboard, for communicating the results from these air quality sensors to the public?
Yep, that's a good question. So I'm not aware of any formal guidelines other than the air quality index, or the AQI, and that is the method that US EPA has agreed to demonstrate the air quality. So it's measured, the AQI is measured by good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive groups, unhealthy, extreme. And so right now that's the best and probably the most practiced way that air quality is visualized. I don't know of any other guidelines other than that. I think data that should be included in the dashboard, like it might be helpful to know when the air quality for a certain pollutant is above the, ambient air quality standard, since that would trigger, not necessarily everyone would experience it, but that is the concentration that's been set and estimated to exacerbate health outcomes. So I think that would be helpful, although that there are a lot of caveats to how those are set, and very specific statistical requirements for getting those values. But that would be my 2 cents for maybe the next step for air quality visualization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the AQI is certainly a great tool for, helping to simplify some of the science for a broader audience. And, of course, the AQI can vary from country to country, but, the concept of using it as a tool to communicate the data to a broader audience is still valid. And, we've even seen some of our partners like LAUSD take it a step further and translate, certain AQI ranges to specific, school-oriented actions, and kind of like a decision-making framework that they can use, when they observe a certain air pollution concentration at one of their schools in their district. They, know exactly what actions to take. So yeah, definitely, recommend using the AQI, and even potentially building on it as a tool for communicating sensor data. And yeah, I think, kind of on a similar note, I have a question from Karen here, which is if we can share any good examples of educational websites for both the public as well as schools. One that certainly comes to mind for me, Maggie, is Love My Air. But yeah, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that front, anything you may have come across in your research as, good kind of like educational air quality education website for the public and schools.
Yeah, that's a good question. So before I joined Clarity, I worked at South Coast Air Quality Management District, and the district had an initiative called WHAM, so Why Healthy Air Matters. I don't know if they have content on their website, but I know that if you're in the Southern California area, you can participate or sign up to get that training. And believe it's for any age, like from K through 12, and it just varies depending on, what the age is. But I know that that's a resource. I don't know of any other ones other than US EPA might have some materials, but you might have to dig for them. But the Why Healthy Air Matters is the biggest one that I know.
Mm-hmm.
And Love My Air is a great one too.
Great. Yeah, Karen, so if you search for either of those, they should be relatively easy to find. Love My Air is associated with Denver, and WHAM is associated with the South Coast AQMD. But yeah, if you have any trouble finding them, please feel free to reach out and follow up, and we can get you in touch with those folks. Great. So another question on calibration. So is it necessary to have the same values as the reference data from our calibrated sensor data, or do we just need to have the same trend with peaks at the same periods And if so, what factors should we apply to the values measured by the sensors to be able to use the data? So I guess this is somewhat alluding to, the difference between, R squared and MAE. But yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on this in terms of, I think most people recognize that sensor data is never going to be 100%, or rarely will track exactly with reference data. But yeah, I don't know, Maggie, if you have other thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would probably still defer to Jack's presentation, but I think overall it is not necessary to have the exact same values as the reference data. I think trends are more important as long as they're tracking similarly. Like if there is a true spike at the reference monitor, is there a true spike that's if there's a true spike at the low cost sensor, is it being also captured by the reference monitor? But yeah, I don't think I'd be able to speak to what factors to apply. That's more of a calibration question, but I think the trend is definitely more important.
Great, yeah, and this one was anonymous. I'm not sure who it came from, but I would encourage you to check out Jack's session from June 7th, and also the white paper that we have on performance targets for air quality sensors. This is kind of a tricky question, that the EPA and others have been grappling with, of like, what should be considered adequate or useful data from an air sensor, kind of recognizing that, it's not likely going to hit that gold standard of FRM or FEM data, but, what can we consider to be useful data or valuable data, coming from either, raw or calibrated air quality sensors. And fortunately the EPA has published some guidelines on that, and these performance targets that they published, can't recall if it was last year or the year before, but they have helped to put some goalposts around, like, what should we be looking for in terms of air quality sensor data performance and data quality objectives. So yeah, we'll follow up with links to the materials hub and other resources that will help everyone understand those concepts better. So Maggie, we have a question from Mosinkan, and I hope I pronounced that right, and I apologize if I didn't nail it. But the question is, I've installed 15 sensor platforms in Nashik City, India for my PhD project. It was a great experience working with low-cost sensors, but it becomes very tedious to visit the host when something goes wrong with the sensor platform. The missing data is the biggest loss. Is there any method to predict the lost data with the help of the nearest sensor platforms when this does occur?
That's a good question. That's not something that I really focused on in my dissertation research. It was more on like the design. There were some studies that talked about sensors that communicated with one another, but I would completely excluded those from my literature review. So they might, but yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine how you could come up with a model to help compensate for some of that lost data. But I do think the best and most robust approach to that issue is to ideally even put data completeness expectation in place with the project. So for example, like with our Breed London project, there is a service level agreement regarding data completeness, and the EU in their data quality objectives for sensors do stipulate a certain degree of data completeness as well. And so that sort of most sync-on, like that sort of puts the burden of ensuring that the sensors are working properly on the sensor manufacturer, where it really should be, as opposed to on the researcher or person implementing the air monitoring network.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
I think two things to add to that are that, Ryan, that's a really good point. And I know EPA also has a data completeness requirement or guideline, which is 75% of data points. So in my other dissertation chapter, for example, I was using data from low-cost sensors, and I only included data that had 75% data completeness. So within, a 24-hour period, only 18 hours. Another factor to consider is like how you're managing the network. So with our Clarity dashboard, you can see the health of your nodes like online. So you don't have to go out there and do any troubleshooting necessarily right away. You might be able to see if the battery is low, or if the connectivity is low, or if you're getting some erroneous readings. And then it isn't until such point that you can go out there. So I think that's also, really great. And to get, a notification when something goes wrong. I think those are all like good, just best practices.
Yeah, agreed. Great. Well, I think we are almost out of time for today. Unfortunately, we do have a few more questions in the Q&A, but I think we are going to have to wrap up. So what we'll do is, we have saved the open questions from the other two sessions, and we're working on putting together a document that we can link in the Materials Hub with some written answers to any outstanding questions from all three of the sessions. So we will follow up with that in the coming weeks. Just one last reminder to everyone to get your homework in by next week, so we can get you that certificate of completion. And while this is the last live boot camp session for this round, keep an eye out for our future boot camps. And certainly don't hesitate to get in touch if there's anything that Clarity can help with in the meantime. We'll be following up with contact info, and thanks again, everyone, for joining and for your engagement in the Q&A. And thank you especially to Dr. Maggie for the excellent presentation today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And thanks, Ryan, and to our wonderful marketing team for setting this up.